Father on Tinder. Finds out that he set a date with daughter kidnapped 34 years ago. My name is Robert Matthews, and I'm about to tell you the most incredible story of my life. It's a story that sounds too impossible to be true, yet it happened to me just 6 months ago. It's about loss, hope, technology, and the mysterious ways life can bring us back to what we've lost. I'm 58 years old now, and I've been a single father for most of my adult life. Well, technically I was a father for only 3 years before my world completely fell apart. You see, 34 years ago, my 3-year-old daughter, Emma, was taken from our front yard while playing. One moment she was there building a sandcastle in our little sandbox, and the next moment she was gone. Just gone. The police searched everywhere. We had helicopters, search dogs, volunteers from 3 counties, and media coverage that lasted for months. But Emma simply vanished without a trace. No ransom demands, no witnesses, no leads that went anywhere. After 2 years of intensive searching, the case went cold. My wife Sarah couldn't handle the grief and uncertainty. She left me when Emma had been missing for 4 years, saying she needed to start over somewhere else. I understood, even though it broke what was left of my heart. I never remarried. I never moved from our house in Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York. I kept Emma's room exactly as it was, thinking maybe somehow someday she might come home. People called me crazy. My therapist gently suggested I might need to accept reality and move forward. But I couldn't. Something deep inside me refused to give up hope. For 34 years, I lived in that house alone. I worked as a high school math teacher, came home to an empty house, and spent my evenings researching missing persons cases, following leads that went nowhere, and calling the police detective assigned to Emma's case every few months. Detective Morrison retired 15 years ago, but his replacement, Detective Rodriguez, was always patient with me, even when I called with another false lead or crazy theory. My friends and family worried about me. My sister Jennifer tried for years to set me up with women, insisting I needed to move on and find happiness. Robert, she'd say, Emma would want you to be happy. She'd want you to live your life. But how could I explain that dating felt like betraying Emma? How could I start a new family when my little girl was still out there somewhere, possibly wondering why her daddy never found her? About a year ago, everything changed. Not because Emma came home, but because I finally accepted that I was getting older and desperately lonely. I was 57, living in an empty house, talking to myself more than to other people. Jennifer had been pushing me to try online dating for years, and finally, after a particularly difficult Christmas spent alone, I decided to give it a shot. Try Tinder, Jennifer suggested. It's simple. Just swipe through profiles and see if anyone catches your interest. You don't have to get serious with anyone. Just start meeting people again. Setting up my profile felt surreal. What do you write about yourself when your entire identity has been father of missing child for 3 decades? I kept it simple. Robert, 57, math teacher, loves hiking and old movies, looking for friendship and maybe more. I uploaded a recent photo that Jennifer had taken of me at her birthday party, where I was actually smiling. The first few months were awkward. I hadn't dated since before Emma was born, and the world of online dating was completely foreign to me. I went on maybe a dozen coffee dates with nice women, but nothing clicked. I was rusty at conversation that didn't revolve around missing persons cases or teaching algebra. Most women seemed to sense I was carrying some heavy emotional baggage, even though I never mentioned Emma on first dates. Then, about 6 months ago, I came across a profile that stopped me cold. The woman's name was Emily, she was 37, and something about her smile in her profile picture made my heart skip. Not in a romantic way, but in a way I couldn't quite identify. She had dark hair and green eyes, and there was something hauntingly familiar about her features. Her profile said she was new to the area, working as a nurse at Albany Medical Center, and loved hiking and reading mystery novels. I stared at that photo for probably 10 minutes before swiping right. To my surprise, we matched immediately. Emily sent the first message. Hi Robert, I love that you're a math teacher. I was always terrible at math, but I really admire people who can make sense of numbers. Want to meet for coffee this weekend? We texted back and forth for the rest of that week, and I found myself genuinely excited about meeting someone for the first time in years. Emily was funny, intelligent, and easy to talk to. She mentioned she'd grown up in foster care and didn't have much family, which explained why she'd moved to our small town for a fresh start. There was something about her writing style, her sense of humor, that felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. We arranged to meet at Cafe Luna, a small coffee shop downtown that had opened since I'd started teaching. I arrived early, as I always do, and sat at a corner table where I could see the entrance. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since high school. At exactly 2 p.m., the door chimed and a woman walked in. I knew immediately it was Emily from her photos, but seeing her in person created the strangest sensation. She was beautiful, with shoulder-length dark hair and those striking green eyes I'd noticed online. But as she scanned the cafe looking for me, something in her expression, the way she tilted her head slightly to the left when concentrating, made my chest tighten with a feeling I couldn't name. I stood up and waved, and when she smiled and walked toward me, I felt dizzy. This was impossible, I told myself. I was just a lonely old man projecting my grief onto an innocent woman who happened to have dark hair and green eyes like thousands of other people. "Robert," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Emily. It's so nice to finally meet you." Her voice. God, her voice. It was lower now, obviously, but there was something in the cadence, the way she pronounced certain words, that sent shivers down my spine. I shook her hand, probably holding it a moment too long, trying to process the flood of emotions hitting me. "Emily, yes, hi. Thank you for meeting me. You're even prettier than your photos." It was a clumsy thing to say, but she laughed, and that laugh, I had to sit down quickly before my knees gave out. We talked for 3 hours that first day. Emily told me about her work as a pediatric nurse, how much she loved working with children. She mentioned she'd always felt drawn to helping kids, especially those who seemed scared or alone. She told me about growing up in foster care in Albany, never knowing her biological parents, moving between different families until she aged out of the system at 18. "I've always wondered about my real family," she said, stirring sugar into her second latte. "I know it sounds silly, but sometimes I feel like I'm looking for someone, even though I don't know who. Like there's someone out there who's looking for me too." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom just to splash cold water on my face and get my emotions under control. This was coincidence. This had to be coincidence. The world was full of people who grew up in foster care, full of people with dark hair and green eyes. I was reading meaning into meaningless details because I was a grieving father who'd never learned to let go. But when I returned to the table, Emily was looking through the photos on her phone. "I don't have many pictures from when I was little," she said. "The foster families I lived with weren't big on taking photos, but I do have this one." She turned her phone toward me. The photo was clearly taken by a social worker or court official. It showed a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with dark hair and pigtails and green eyes that seemed too big for her face. She was wearing a yellow dress with tiny flowers on it. But what made my heart stop wasn't the dress or even her features. It was the small stuffed rabbit she was clutching in her arms. I knew that rabbit. I had bought that rabbit for Emma on her 2nd birthday. It was purple and had one ear that was slightly chewed because Emma used to nibble on it when she was teething. She called it Bunny and carried it everywhere. The rabbit in Emily's photo was definitely purple, and even in the blurry image I could see that one ear looked different from the other. "That's Bunny," I whispered without thinking. "What?" Emily looked confused. "Sorry, The rabbit. You called it Bunny?" Emily's eyes widened. "How did you know that? I never told anyone that name. The social workers tried to get me to call it other names, said I needed to move on from whatever life I'd had before, but I insisted it was Bunny. I had that rabbit until I was 8, when one of my foster brothers tore it apart during a fight. I excused myself again, this time calling Jennifer from the parking lot with shaking hands. "Jen, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said when she answered. "I'm at a coffee date with a woman I met on Tinder. She's 37 years old, grew up in foster care in Albany, and she has a photo of herself as a child holding Emma's stuffed rabbit. Robert, honey, you need to slow down." "What are you saying?" "I think I'm on a date with Emma." There was a long silence. "Robert, that's impossible. You know that's impossible. You're projecting again. We've talked about this with Dr. Peterson. Jen, I know how it sounds, but she looks exactly like Sarah did at that age. She has Emma's eyes, Emma's smile, and she's holding Bunny in a photo from when she was in foster care. The age is exactly right. She was found and put into the system around the time Emma disappeared. Have you told her who you think she might be?" "Of course not. I'm probably wrong. I'm probably just a crazy old man seeing what I want to see. But Jen, what if I'm not wrong? What if this is really her?" Jennifer convinced me to go slowly, to not say anything to Emily that day, and to contact Detective Rodriguez before doing anything else. I went back into the cafe and somehow managed to finish our conversation without revealing the tornado of emotions inside me. Emily and I made plans to meet again the following weekend for a hiking trip. That night I called Detective Rodriguez and explained the situation. He was skeptical, but professional. "Mr. Matthews, I understand why this would be emotional for you, but you need to be very careful here. If this woman is not your daughter, and you approach her with these suspicions, you could frighten her and potentially face legal issues yourself. If there's any possibility this could be Emma, we need to handle it properly." He agreed to run Emily's information through the system and see if there were any connections to Emma's case. He also suggested that if I wanted to pursue this, the only definitive way to know would be through DNA testing, which would require Emily's consent and would need to be handled delicately. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I continued dating. I felt like a fraud, pretending to be interested in her romantically when what I really wanted was to study every detail of her face, her mannerisms, her stories, looking for clues about whether she could be my lost daughter. But the more time I spent with her, the more convinced I became. She had a small scar on her left knee that she said came from falling off a tricycle when she was very young. Emma had fallen off her tricycle and gotten stitches on that exact spot just 2 months before she disappeared. Emily was left-handed, just like Emma. She had an inexplicable fear of red pickup trucks, which made her nervous in traffic. Emma had been playing in our front yard when she disappeared, and several neighbors reported seeing a red pickup truck driving slowly through our neighborhood that afternoon. Most convincingly, Emily had memories that she couldn't explain. She told me about recurring dreams she'd had since childhood about a man who would read her bedtime stories and sing her a specific lullaby. She hummed a few bars of the tune and I nearly choked on my coffee. It was "You Are My Sunshine," which I had sung to Emma every single night before bed. "I've always wondered if that was my father in those dreams," Emily said wistfully. "I used to imagine he was still looking for me, even though the social workers told me my parents had given me up voluntarily. Deep down, I never believed that. I always felt like someone was missing me. I had to step outside to compose myself. This beautiful, kind, intelligent woman sitting across from me, who made me laugh for the first time in years, who made me feel like I might actually have a future worth living. She might be my Emma. The little girl I'd been searching for, mourning and missing for 34 years, might be sitting in a cafe with me, thinking we were on a romantic date. Detective Rodriguez called me back after 2 weeks. "Robert, I've got some interesting information. The woman you're dating, Emily Carson, was indeed placed in foster care in Albany in September 1991, approximately 2 months after Emma's disappearance. She was found alone at a bus station with no identification. The description in her file matches Emma's physical characteristics from the time she went missing. But Robert, this is still not proof. There could be explanations. What do I do?" I asked him. "That's up to you. But if you want to know for sure, you're going to have to tell her the truth and ask her to take a DNA test. And you need to be prepared for the possibility that she's not Emma, and that this revelation could end your relationship with her." I spent sleepless nights wrestling with this decision. What if I was wrong? What if I destroyed this budding relationship with a wonderful woman because of my inability to let go of the past? What if I traumatized Emily by suggesting she might be someone she wasn't? But what if I was right? What if my daughter was finally within reach, and I let her slip away because I was too afraid to ask the hard questions? The decision was made for me 3 weeks later, during what was supposed to be our 5th date. We had driven up to Lake George for a picnic, and Emily seemed unusually quiet on the drive. When we found a spot by the water and spread out our blanket, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My heart started racing. "Of course, Emily. What is it? Are you my father?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, unable to speak for several long moments. What makes you ask that?" "I've been thinking about this for weeks. The way you look at me like you're seeing someone else. The way you react when I tell you stories about my childhood, or when I mention things I remember. And there are so many coincidences, Robert. Too many to ignore." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo I hadn't seen before. It was a different picture from her childhood, this one taken when she was maybe 6 or 7. In the background, barely visible, was a missing child poster on a wall. The photo was too blurry to read the details, but the layout looked familiar. I found this picture last week when I was going through some old documents from my foster care files. I took it to a photo shop and had them enhance the background. Robert, I think that's my missing poster on the wall. She swiped to the next photo, the enhanced version. There, clear as day, was a missing child poster with Emma's photo and the words, "Missing, Emma Matthews, age 3, Millbrook, NY." I started crying then, tears I'd been holding back for weeks. "Emily, I think you might be my daughter, Emma. I've thought so since our first coffee date, but I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid I was wrong, afraid I was just a desperate old man seeing what he wanted to see." Emily was crying too. "I've been researching missing children cases from 1991. I found Emma Matthews 3 days ago. I've been staring at her photos, and Robert, she looks exactly like me when I was little. But more than that, when I saw your name on the missing person reports, when I realized the father's name was Robert Matthews, I couldn't believe I was actually dating the man who might be my father. We sat by that lake for hours, sharing stories, comparing details, trying to piece together what might have happened. Emily told me about her earliest memories in foster care, about how she'd always insisted her name was Emma, even though the social worker said her name was Emily when she was found. She told me about nightmares she'd had as a child about being taken away from a man who was calling her name, how she'd always been drawn to playgrounds and would search the faces of adult men, hoping to recognize someone. I told her about the 34 years I'd spent searching, about the bedroom I'd kept intact, about the hope I'd refused to abandon even when everyone told me I should. I told her about her mother Sarah, how the loss had been too much for our marriage to survive, but how I'd never stopped believing Emma was alive somewhere. "There's only one way to know for sure," I finally said. "We need to take a DNA test." Emily nodded. "I already bought 2 kits online. They're in my apartment. I was hoping you'd agree to take one." We drove to Emily's apartment, a small but cozy place she'd been renting for the past 6 months since moving to the area. As she handed me the DNA kit, I noticed something that made my knees weak. On her kitchen counter was a small framed photo of the enhanced missing child poster. "I printed it out," she said, following my gaze. "I've been staring at it every morning, wondering if that little girl in the photo is really me, and if the man who's been looking for her is really you." We each swabbed our cheeks and sealed the samples according to the instructions. The kit promised results in 3 to 5 business days. Those were the longest 5 days of my life. During that waiting period, Emily and I met every day. We walked through downtown Millbrook, and she commented on how familiar everything looked. We drove past the house where Emma had lived, and Emily stared at it for a long time. "I dream about this house," she said quietly. "I've been driving past it since I moved here, not knowing why I felt drawn to it. In my dreams, I'm playing in that front yard, and there's a man watching me from the window smiling. I had to pull over because I was crying too hard to drive safely. That was exactly where I used to stand every morning while Emma played outside before we left for her daycare." On Thursday afternoon, 5 days after we'd submitted our samples, I got the email notification that our results were ready. I called Emily immediately. "They're in," I said. "I know. I got the notification too. I'm too scared to look. Want to look together?" We met at Cafe Luna, the same place where we'd had our first date. We sat at the same corner table, both of us with our phones out, both of us too terrified to log into the results website. On the count of 3, Emily suggested. 1, 2, 3. We both opened our apps at the same time. The results loaded, and there it was in black and white. Probability of paternity, 99. 97%. Emily started sobbing first, and then I was crying too, and we were holding each other in the middle of a coffee shop while other customers stared at us. I didn't care. After 34 years, I had found my daughter. My Emma was alive, she was healthy, she was successful, and she was sitting right there in my arms. "Daddy?" she whispered into my shoulder. "Yes, baby girl. Yes, it's Daddy. I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping." The next few hours were a blur of emotions, phone calls, and trying to process the impossibility of what had happened. We called Detective Rodriguez first, who was amazed and immediately reopened Emma's case to investigate what had happened to her after she disappeared. We called Jennifer, who screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. We called the local newspaper, whose reporter couldn't believe the story we were telling her. Over the following weeks, pieces of Emma's story began coming together. She had been taken by a woman named Patricia Willows, who was struggling with infertility and had become obsessed with the idea of having a child. Patricia had been watching our family for weeks before she took Emma. learning our routines, waiting for the right moment. She had driven Emma to Albany, dyed her hair, and told authorities she'd found an abandoned child at the bus station. Patricia had kept Emma for 3 years, during which time Emma's memories of her original life began to fade, as often happens with very young children. When Patricia's husband discovered what she'd done, he threatened to turn her in. In a panic, Patricia abandoned Emma at the same bus station where she'd claimed to find her, and disappeared. She was eventually found and arrested 2 months ago, living under a false identity in Florida. She confessed to everything once she was confronted with the DNA evidence. The legal proceedings were complex, but the most important thing was that Emma and I were reunited. She moved out of her apartment and moved back into her childhood home. I finally converted her old bedroom into a guest room, and we set up a new room for her that reflected who she was now, not the 3-year-old she'd been when she left. Learning to be father and daughter again after 34 years was not easy. We both had to adjust to the reality that I was now 58 and she was 37. We couldn't pick up where we'd left off when she was 3. Instead, we had to build a new relationship between 2 adults who shared DNA and a traumatic history, but who were essentially strangers. Emily had to process the fact that everything she'd been told about her origins was a lie. The social workers who'd told her she'd been abandoned by parents who didn't want her had been working with false information. She'd spent her entire life believing she was unwanted, when in reality, her father had never stopped searching for her. I had to process the fact that my little girl was now a grown woman with her own life, her own opinions, her own experiences that I hadn't been part of. I couldn't protect her from the pain she'd already experienced, couldn't give her back the childhood that had been stolen from her. I had to learn to love and support the woman she'd become, not just mourn the child she'd been. We started family therapy to help us navigate this unprecedented situation. Dr. Sarah Kim, a specialist in family reunification, helped us understand that our feelings of confusion and awkwardness were completely normal. You're essentially meeting each other for the first time as the people you are now, she explained. Don't put pressure on yourselves to immediately feel like a typical father and daughter. Focus on getting to know each other and building trust. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the media attention. Once our story broke, it went viral. We had reporters camping outside our house, requests for interviews from major news networks, and calls from Hollywood producers wanting to buy the rights to our story. Everyone wanted to know how it felt to accidentally swipe right on your own daughter on a dating app. Emily handled the attention better than I did. I've spent my whole life feeling invisible, she told one reporter. If our story helps other families never give up hope, then maybe all those years of separation weren't completely meaningless. We did eventually do a few interviews, always together, focusing on the importance of never giving up hope and the amazing advances in DNA technology that made our reunion possible. We were careful never to sensationalize the story or focus on the more disturbing aspects of what had happened to Emma. The most emotional moment came about 2 months after our reunion, when Emma asked if she could see her old room. I had kept it exactly as it was the day she disappeared. Her tiny clothes still hung in the closet. Her toys were still arranged on the shelves exactly where she'd left them. Her toddler bed was still made with the same princess sheets. Emma stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. She picked up toys one by one, and I could see recognition flickering in her eyes. When she found a small music box that played "You Are My Sunshine," she wound it up and sat on the floor listening to the melody. "I remember this song," she said softly. "I remember a man singing it to me. Was that you, Daddy?" "Every night," I told her. "I sang it to you every single night." We decided to contact her birth mother, Sarah, who was now living in Oregon with her second husband and 2 teenage children. The phone call was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Sarah had remarried 12 years after leaving me, and while she'd never forgotten Emma, she had built a new life and had tried to move forward. "Is it really her?" Sarah asked through tears when I called to tell her the news. "It's really her, Sarah. It's our Emma." Sarah flew out the following week to meet Emma. Their reunion was emotional but complicated. Emma was understandably confused about why her mother had left after she disappeared, and Sarah struggled with guilt over not being there for the search and discovery. They're still working on their relationship through family therapy, but they're making progress. One of the most unexpected challenges was dealing with our original romantic connection. Emily and I had genuinely enjoyed each other's company during those early dates, and there had been a real connection between us, just not the kind we'd thought. It took several therapy sessions to process the fact that we'd been attracted to each other's personalities and senses of humor, and that this wasn't weird or wrong, just complicated. You were drawn to each other because you're family, Dr. Kim explained. There's often an unconscious recognition between relatives, even when they don't consciously know they're related. The connection you felt was real, just not romantic. Today, 6 months after our first coffee date, Emma and I are building a beautiful father-daughter relationship. She comes over for dinner twice a week, and we're teaching each other about the lives we lived while we were apart. She's introduced me to modern technology, helped me understand social media, and even convinced me to get a smartphone. I've shared 34 years of stories about her mother and me, shown her photo albums from before she was born, and told her about all the birthdays and holidays I spent missing her. Emma decided to keep her name as Emily professionally, since that's how all her nursing credentials are registered, but she goes by Emma when we're together. She's thinking about hyphenating her last name to Emily Carson Matthews, which makes me incredibly proud. We're also working together on a foundation to help other families of missing children. Emma's experience in foster care has given her insights into how the system could be improved, and my 34 years of searching has taught me about the resources families need during the worst times of their lives. The most amazing part of this entire story is not just that I found my daughter, but how I found her. If Jennifer hadn't convinced me to try online dating, if I hadn't swiped right on Emily's profile, if we hadn't matched, if any one of 1,000 small details had been different, we might never have found each other. Emily had been living just 2 hours away from me for 6 months, working at a hospital where I'd driven past hundreds of times. We could have crossed paths anywhere and never realized who we were to each other. But somehow, through the modern miracle of dating apps and the mysterious workings of fate, a father and daughter found each other while looking for love in all the wrong places. People ask me all the time if I'm angry about the years we lost, angry at Patricia Willows for taking Emma, angry at the system that failed to connect us sooner. The truth is, I don't have room in my heart for anger anymore. I'm too grateful. Emma grew up to be an incredible woman, kind, intelligent, caring, strong. She chose a career helping children, which I believe comes from her own experience of needing help as a child. She's resilient in ways I never had to be, and wise in ways that only come from overcoming real hardship. Would I change the past if I could? Of course. Would I want Emma to have grown up with me in the house where she belonged, surrounded by family who loved her? Absolutely. But I can't change the past. All I can do is be grateful for the present and the future we now get to share. Emma and I are planning a trip to visit all the places she lived during her time in foster care. She wants to thank the families who were kind to her and confront some of the situations that weren't so positive. We're also planning to visit Sarah and her family in Oregon this summer, so Emma can meet her half-siblings. I've learned that families can be taken apart and put back together in ways that don't make logical sense. I've learned that love can survive decades of separation, that hope is sometimes rewarded in the most unexpected ways, and that technology can create miracles we never could have imagined. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late for a happy ending. For 34 years, I lived with a broken heart, convinced that my story could only end in sadness. I was wrong. Sometimes the universe has bigger plans than we can see, and sometimes the people we're looking for are also looking for us. 3 months ago, Emma and I were walking through downtown Millbrook when we passed Cafe Luna. "Want to get coffee?" she asked. "For old time's sake?" We sat at the same corner table where we'd had our first date, but this time I ordered hot chocolate instead of coffee, and Emma got the same. "You know," she said, stirring marshmallows into her drink, "I always wondered what it would be like to have coffee with my dad. I just never imagined it would happen after I'd already had coffee with him while thinking he was a potential boyfriend." We both started laughing, and for the first time since she disappeared, I felt complete. My family was broken for 34 years, but it wasn't destroyed. It was just waiting for the right moment to come back together. If you're a parent of a missing child reading this story, please don't give up hope. Keep their rooms ready. Keep their photos visible. Keep believing that somewhere out there, they're thinking about you too. Technology is advancing every day. DNA databases are growing, and social media is connecting people in ways we never thought possible. And if you're someone who was adopted or grew up in foster care and you've always wondered about your biological family, consider taking a DNA test. Upload your information to the databases. Share your story. You never know who might be looking for you. Emma and I were reunited because we were both brave enough to put ourselves out there, to be vulnerable, to take chances on love and connection. We found each other because we refused to give up. I refused to give up searching, and she refused to give up hoping that someone somewhere missed her. Our story proves that families can be broken and mended, that love can survive any amount of time and distance, and that sometimes the person you're meant to find is also searching for you. It proves that hope is never wasted, that advances in technology can heal old wounds, and that it's never too late for a new beginning. Today, Emma calls me every morning before her shift at the hospital, and every evening when she gets home. We're making up for 34 years of missed conversations, one phone call at a time. She's teaching me to use social media to share our story and help other families. And I'm teaching her about the family history she missed, the stories about her grandparents and great-grandparents who never got to see her grow up. We're planning to plant a garden together this spring in the backyard where she used to play. Emma wants to plant sunflowers because she says they remind her of the song I used to sing to her. I told her we'll plant the biggest, brightest sunflowers we can find, because after 34 years of darkness, we have every reason to turn our faces toward the light. Sometimes people ask me if I'm planning to go back on dating apps now that Emily and I know who we really are to each other. I always laugh and tell them no. I got exactly what I was looking for on Tinder. I wasn't really looking for a wife or a girlfriend. I was looking for my family. I was looking for the missing piece of my heart. I was looking for my daughter. And against all odds, in the most impossible way imaginable, I found her. Our story is proof that miracles still happen, that technology can reunite families in ways we never could have imagined, and that love, real, unconditional, parent-child love, can survive anything. It's proof that when you love someone enough to never stop looking, sometimes the universe conspires to help you find them. Emma and I know we're incredibly lucky. Most missing children cases don't end this way. Most fathers don't get their daughters back after 34 years. Most people don't accidentally swipe right on their own family members, but it happened to us, and we want other families to know that hope is always worth holding on to. As I write this story, Emma is in the kitchen making dinner for us both. She's humming "You Are My Sunshine" while she cooks, and I'm sitting at the same table where I used to help her with coloring books when she was 3 years old. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe this is real. Tonight, after dinner, we're going to call Sarah together and tell her about Emma's promotion to head pediatric nurse. Tomorrow, we're driving to Albany to visit the foster family who was kindest to Emma during her childhood, so I can thank them for taking care of my daughter when I couldn't. And someday soon, we're going to take that trip to plant sunflowers, because both of us are finally ready to stop looking backward and start growing something beautiful together. If there's one thing I want people to take away from our story, it's this. Never underestimate the power of hope. Never stop believing in the possibility of miracles, and never be afraid to take chances on love and connection. You never know who might be looking for you, and you never know when a simple swipe right might change your entire life. Sometimes the person you're meant to find is also searching for you. Sometimes the family you've lost is closer than you think. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a plan bigger than anything you could imagine. My daughter is home. After 34 years, Emma is finally home. The healing process. The weeks following our DNA confirmation were filled with a whirlwind of emotions that I never could have prepared for. Joy, relief, gratitude, but also grief for all the years we'd lost, and anxiety about building a relationship with someone who was both my child and a complete stranger. Emma and I decided to take things slowly. We met with Dr. Kim twice a week initially, learning how to navigate this unprecedented situation. One of the first things we had to address was the awkwardness of our initial romantic connection. It's not something either of us likes to dwell on, but it was important to process those feelings with professional help. What you experienced, Dr. Kim explained, was genetic sexual attraction, which is actually quite common when biological relatives meet for the first time as adults. It's not the same as romantic attraction. It's your brain's way of recognizing genetic similarity and biological connection. The fact that you both felt drawn to each other actually supports the DNA evidence. Understanding this helped us move past the uncomfortable feelings and focus on building our father-daughter relationship. We established boundaries, created new traditions, and slowly began to feel comfortable calling each other Dad and Emma instead of Robert and Emily. One of our first projects together was going through the boxes of Emma's belongings I'd saved over the years. I had kept everything, Her baby clothes, her toys, her first attempts at drawing, even a lock of hair from her first haircut. Emma cried when she saw how carefully I'd preserved everything. "You really believed I was coming back," she said, holding a tiny pink dress she'd worn on her second birthday. "I knew you were coming back," I corrected her. I didn't know how or when, but I knew. We also went through her foster care files together, which Emily had obtained after our reunion. Some of the families had been kind and loving, treating her like their own daughter. Others had been less nurturing, seeing foster children as sources of income rather than children who needed love and stability. Reading about some of the experiences she'd endured during those years was heartbreaking for me. There were reports of Emily asking caseworkers if anyone was looking for her, of her drawing pictures of a man she said was her real daddy, of her refusing to be adopted by families who wanted to change her name completely from Emily to something else. "I always knew my name was supposed to be Emma," she told me. "Emily was close enough that I could live with it, but I never felt like an Emily. I felt like someone else. Someone whose real name started with the same letters." Rebuilding our extended family. Reconnecting with Sarah proved to be one of the more complex aspects of our reunion. When Sarah arrived from Oregon, the three of us sat in my living room, the same living room where we'd once been a family, and tried to figure out how to move forward. Sarah had changed significantly over the years. She was remarried to a good man named David, and they had 2 children together, Michael 16 and Jessica 14. She'd built a successful career as a real estate agent and seemed to have found the peace that had eluded her after Emma's disappearance. "I need you to understand," Sarah said to Emma during that first meeting. "Leaving your father wasn't about not loving you or giving up hope. I just couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Everything reminded me of you and I was drowning in grief. I thought if I stayed I'd lose my mind completely." Emma listened quietly, then reached over and took Sarah's hand. "I understand. I've worked with enough families in crisis to know that people grieve differently. You did what you needed to do to survive." Sarah's children were initially skeptical about having a 37-year-old half-sister they'd never heard of, but Emma's natural warmth won them over quickly. Michael was fascinated by the technology aspects of our story and kept asking Emma about her memories of being in foster care. Jessica, who was interested in becoming a nurse herself, peppered Emma with questions about her career. During Sarah's week-long visit, we established some new family traditions. We decided to celebrate Emma's birthday twice each year, once on her actual birthday in March and once on the anniversary of our reunion in October. We planned an annual family vacation where Sarah's family would come to New York, or we'd all meet somewhere in between. Most importantly, we all agreed that Emma was under no obligation to have any particular type of relationship with any of us. She was an adult who'd lived her entire life without us, and she had the right to decide how much or how little she wanted us to be part of her future. Community response. The response from our small town of Millbrook was overwhelming. Local businesses donated money for Emma's college loans, which she'd been paying off for years. The hospital where she worked threw her a welcome home party, even though she'd already been working there for months before we discovered our connection. Mrs. Patterson, who had been Emma's preschool teacher and was now in her 80s, came to visit us with a box of artwork Emma had made in her class. "I saved these because I always hoped someday they'd find their way back to her," she said, tears streaming down her face. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about our story, but they focused on the positive aspects: the power of hope, advances in DNA technology, and the importance of supporting foster children. They interviewed other families with missing children, and several of them reported new leads or renewed motivation to continue their searches. Detective Rodriguez became something of a local celebrity himself. He'd been working missing persons cases for 20 years, and he said ours was the most positive outcome he'd ever experienced. He used our story in training sessions for new officers, emphasizing the importance of never closing cases completely and staying open to unconventional ways cases might be resolved. New challenges and growth. As Emma and I grew more comfortable with each other, new challenges emerged. She had to learn to trust that I wouldn't disappear from her life again, even though intellectually, she knew I hadn't chosen to disappear the first time. I had to learn to see her as an independent adult rather than the 3-year-old I'd been mourning for decades. We disagreed about things, which was both normal and difficult. When Emma decided she wanted to reach out to some of her former foster families to thank them, I worried about her reopening potentially painful memories. When I suggested she might want to consider moving back to Millbrook permanently, She firmly explained that she loved her life in Albany and wasn't interested in moving backward. "Dad," she said during one of our therapy sessions, "I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I would have been if I'd grown up with you. Foster care changed me, shaped me, made me who I am. I don't want to pretend I'm someone else to make you feel better about the past." She was right, of course. The Emma who came home to me was stronger, more independent, and more resilient than the Emma I'd been imagining all these years. She'd had to learn to survive on her own, to advocate for herself, to build a life without the safety net of unconditional family love. Those experiences had made her into a remarkable woman, even though I wished she hadn't had to go through them. The legal resolution, Patricia Willows, the woman who had taken Emma, was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison for kidnapping and child endangerment. The case had been complicated by the passage of time, and the fact that some of the original evidence had been lost or deteriorated over the decades. Emma chose not to attend the sentencing hearing. "I don't need to see her," she told me. "I don't need to hear her explanation or her apology. I've built a good life despite what she did, and I don't want to give her any more of my emotional energy." I respected her decision, though I did attend the hearing myself. I wanted to see justice done, wanted Patricia Willows to face consequences for the 34 years of pain she'd caused our family. When the judge read the sentence, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Patricia's lawyer had argued for leniency based on her mental health issues and the fact that she'd provided for Emma during the 3 years she'd kept her. But the prosecutor successfully argued that the crime had destroyed 2 families, ours and Emma's foster families who'd loved her and lost her repeatedly, and that the long-term consequences demanded serious punishment. After the sentencing, I visited Patricia Willows in prison. I'm not sure why I felt compelled to do this, but I needed to look her in the eye and try to understand what had driven her to take my child. She was a small, frail woman in her 70s now, and when she saw me, she immediately started crying. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't help, but I loved her. I loved Emma like she was my own daughter." "But she wasn't your daughter," I replied quietly. "She was mine, and I spent 34 years wondering if she was dead, wondering if I'd failed to protect her, wondering if I'd ever see her again. Your love for her doesn't erase the damage you caused." Patricia told me about her own struggles with infertility, about multiple miscarriages and failed adoptions, about how desperate she'd become to have a child. None of it excused what she'd done, but it helped me understand that she hadn't taken Emma out of cruelty, but out of a twisted desperation that had consumed her judgment. "Is she happy?" Patricia asked me before I left. "Did she grow up to be happy?" "She's extraordinary," I told her. "She's a pediatric nurse who spends her days helping children. She's kind, intelligent, and strong. She survived what you did to her and became someone amazing despite it." Patricia nodded and wiped her eyes. "I'm glad. I always hoped she'd be okay." I left that prison visit feeling something I hadn't expected, a strange sort of peace. Not forgiveness exactly, but an understanding that carrying hatred for Patricia Willows would only hurt me and Emma. She'd already taken enough from our family. I wasn't going to give her any more of our emotional energy. Moving forward together. 6 months after our reunion, Emma and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. She came over for dinner every Sunday, and we'd spend the afternoon cooking together and catching up on our weeks. I'd started attending some of her work events, meeting her colleagues who'd become like family to her over the years. Emma had also begun dating again, which was an adjustment for both of us. Her boyfriend Mark was a fellow nurse at the hospital, and he was remarkably understanding about our unusual situation. "I've never met anyone who talks about their dad the way Emily talks about you," he told me when Emma brought him over for Sunday dinner. "She lights up when she tells stories about the things you do together." Watching Emma in a romantic relationship was strange for me initially. I'd missed her entire dating history, her first heartbreaks, her learning to navigate adult relationships. But Mark was clearly good for her, and seeing her happy and loved by someone her own age helped me understand that our reunion hadn't just given me back my daughter, it had given her back her family foundation, which allowed her to build healthier relationships with everyone in her life. We also began working on the Missing Children Foundation we'd discussed. Emma had the idea to create a program that would help foster children understand their rights regarding information about their origins, and help them access resources for searching for biological families if they chose to do so. So many kids in foster care are told they should just be grateful for what they have, and stop asking questions about where they came from. Emma explained to the foundation board we'd assembled. But having questions about your origins is natural and healthy. We want to support those kids in getting answers, whether those answers lead to reunion or just to understanding. The foundation also worked to improve communication between missing children organizations and foster care systems. In many cases, like ours, missing children enter foster care under different identities, and the systems don't always cross-reference effectively. Unexpected discoveries. About 8 months after our reunion, Emma made a discovery that added another layer to our story. While cleaning out some boxes from her apartment, she found a small diary she'd kept during her early years in foster care. Most of it was typical child observations about her daily life, but there were several entries that mentioned dreams about her first daddy. "I had a dream about my first daddy again," read one entry from when she was 7 years old. "He was singing the Sunshine Song and reading me a story about a bunny. I wish I could remember his face better. In the dream, he was looking for me and calling my name, but I couldn't find him." Reading those entries was both heartbreaking and validating. Even as a child, Emma had maintained some connection to her memories of me, even when everyone around her was telling her to forget her past and focus on her future. But the most significant discovery came in the form of a letter Emma had written but never sent when she was 16. She'd addressed it to "My real dad wherever you are," and had poured out all her feelings about growing up in foster care, about wondering if anyone missed her, about hoping that someday she'd find her way home. "I know you're probably not looking for me anymore," the letter read. "The social workers say most parents move on and start new families. But if you're still thinking about me sometimes, I want you to know that I'm okay. I'm going to graduate from high school next year, and I want to become a nurse so I can help other kids like me. I still have dreams about you singing to me, and I still remember that you called me Emma even though everyone else calls me Emily. If I ever find you, I hope you'll be proud of who I became." I cried for an hour after reading that letter. All those years when I'd felt like I was the only one holding on to hope, Emma had been hoping too. All those years when I'd wondered if she even remembered me, she'd been writing letters to me in her diary and dreaming about our reunion. We decided to frame that letter and hang it in our living room, next to a photo from Emma's first day back in her childhood home. It serves as a reminder that love and hope can survive any amount of separation, and that sometimes the people we're missing are missing us just as much. Creating new memories. One of the most healing parts of our reunion has been creating new memories together while honoring the past. We started a tradition of hiking together every Saturday morning, exploring the trails around Millbrook and the surrounding areas. During these hikes, we talk about everything: our weeks at work, our hopes for the future, and sometimes the pain of our lost years. Emma has become my guide to modern technology and social media. She helped me set up a Facebook page where I share updates about our story and connect with other families dealing with missing children cases. Through that page, we've been contacted by 3 other families who found missing relatives through DNA testing, and 2 families who've gotten new leads on cold cases. I've become Emma's guide to our family history. I've shown her photo albums dating back to our great-grandparents, told her stories about the relatives she never got to meet, and helped her understand the family traits and characteristics she'd always wondered about. "I always wondered why I was left-handed when none of my foster families were," she told me one afternoon as we looked through old photos, "and why I had such a strong reaction to certain smells, like cinnamon and vanilla. Now I know it's because Grandma Ruth always made cinnamon cookies when I was little, and you used vanilla candles in my nursery." We also started cooking together, recreating some of Emma's favorite meals from when she was a toddler. I'd remembered that she loved grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles and tomato soup, and when I made them for her during one of our Sunday dinners, she started crying. "I've been craving grilled cheese and tomato soup my entire life," she said. "I thought it was just comfort food, but now I realize it was a memory trying to surface." The ripple effects. Our story had impacts far beyond our immediate family. The hospital where Emma worked implemented a new program to help healthcare workers who were adopted or grew up in foster care access DNA testing and family search resources. Several of Emma's colleagues discovered they had living relatives they'd never known about. The Millbrook Police Department updated their protocols for missing children cases, implementing new systems for cross-referencing with foster care placements, and requiring periodic reviews of cold cases using advancing DNA technology. Most meaningfully to me, our local elementary school started a program called Emma's Hope, which provides support and resources for families dealing with missing children. They brought in counselors, support groups, and educational programs about keeping hope alive during impossible circumstances. Emma was invited to speak at the program's launch event. Standing at the podium in the same elementary school where she would have attended kindergarten, she talked about the importance of never giving up on family connections. "I spent 34 years wondering if anyone missed me," she told the audience of parents, teachers, and community members. "Now I know that every single day my father was wondering the same thing about me." We found each other because we both refused to stop hoping. Hope isn't always rewarded, but when it is, it can change everything. Learning about each other. One of the most beautiful aspects of our reunion has been discovering how similar we are despite growing up apart. Emma and I both love crossword puzzles, both prefer rainy days to sunny ones, and both have the habit of organizing our thoughts by making lists. We both tend to be night owls, both enjoy old movies more than new ones, and both have a tendency to adopt stray animals. Emma told me that throughout her childhood, she'd been drawn to older men who seemed kind and patient, often seeking out father figures among her teachers, coaches, and the fathers of her friends. "I was always looking for someone who felt familiar," she realized. "I was looking for you." I confessed that I'd always been drawn to helping young people who seemed lost or alone. Over the years, I'd mentored dozens of students who were struggling, always seeing a bit of Emma in the kids who seemed to need extra support. "I was practicing being your father with other people's children," I told her. We discovered that we both had the same recurring nightmare, being in a crowded place and hearing someone calling our name, but being unable to find the person calling. For me, it was always Emma's voice calling Daddy. For Emma, it was always a man's voice calling Emma. We'd both been having these dreams for decades, and they'd stopped completely after our reunion. The investigation continues. While Emma and I focused on building our relationship, Detective Rodriguez continued investigating what had happened during the years Emma was missing. The case had become something of an obsession for him, partly because of its unusual resolution and partly because he wanted to ensure we had complete answers. His investigation revealed that Patricia Willows had been stalking our family for weeks before taking Emma. She'd followed us to the grocery store, to Emma's daycare, to the park where we played on weekends. She'd learned our routines and had been planning the kidnapping for over a month. Security cameras from a gas station 14 miles from our house had captured footage of Patricia's red pickup truck on the day Emma disappeared, with what appeared to be a small child in the passenger seat. The footage was too grainy to be definitive evidence at the time, but enhanced with modern technology, it clearly showed Emma's distinctive yellow dress. Patricia had kept Emma for 3 years, during which time she'd homeschooled her and rarely let her leave the house. Emma's memories from this period were fragmented, but with Dr. Kim's help, some details began to surface. She remembered a woman who was sometimes kind but often anxious and paranoid, who would disappear for days at a time and leave Emma with neighbors who didn't ask questions. When Patricia's husband discovered what she'd done, he'd given her an ultimatum: return the child or he'd call the police himself. Rather than face the consequences of her actions, Patricia had driven Emma to the Albany bus station, told her to wait there because someone would come get her, and drove away. Emma had waited at that bus station for 6 hours before a janitor found her and called social services. She was 5 years old, scared, confused, and couldn't provide enough coherent information for authorities to figure out where she'd come from. Her memories of her life before Patricia were vague, and she couldn't remember her last name or her parents' names clearly enough for investigators to track down her origins. The system failed her. Detective Rodriguez told me bluntly. If they'd run her DNA in 1994, if they'd cross-referenced missing children reports more thoroughly, if they'd followed up more aggressively on her insistence that her name was Emma, not Emily, we might have found the connection. But missing children investigations and foster care systems didn't communicate well back then, and DNA testing wasn't standard protocol. Learning these details was difficult, but it also provided closure. Emma and I finally understood the full scope of what had happened to our family, and we could begin to truly heal from the trauma, rather than just coping with the unknown. Looking forward. Today, nearly a year after our reunion, Emma and I have built something beautiful together. It's not the father-daughter relationship we would have had if she'd grown up with me, but it's something uniquely ours, shaped by loss and recovery, strengthened by the knowledge of how precious and fragile family connections can be. Emma decided to pursue her master's degree in pediatric nursing, and I've been helping her study for the entrance exams. Having a daughter who's helping sick children feels like a gift I never could have imagined. She channels the pain of her own childhood into healing for other kids, and I couldn't be more proud of the woman she became. We're also planning a trip to Ireland next summer, tracing our family genealogy that Emma never got to learn about. My grandfather emigrated from County Cork in the 1920s, and Emma is excited to see where our family came from and understand more of her heritage. Mark proposed to Emma 3 months ago, and she said yes. Their wedding is planned for next spring, and I'll be walking her down the aisle, something I never thought I'd get to do. Sarah and her family will be coming for the wedding, and we're all working together to plan a celebration that honors both Emma's new beginning and our family's reunion. Perhaps most importantly, Emma and I have both learned to live in the present while honoring the past. We don't spend our time together mourning the years we lost anymore. Instead, we focus on making the most of the years we have ahead of us. I used to be angry that I missed your childhood, I told Emma recently as we planted those sunflowers we'd talked about. But now I realize I get something most fathers don't get. I get to know you as an adult, as the person you chose to become. I get to be proud of you not just for being my daughter, but for being an incredible human being who happened to be my daughter. Emma smiled and handed me another sunflower seed. And I get to know you as the father who never gave up on me. I get to see what unconditional love looks like even after 34 years. Most people take that for granted, but I never will. Our story isn't over. It's just beginning again in a way we never could have expected. We've learned that families can be broken and healed, that love can survive any amount of time and distance, and that sometimes the most important swipe right of your life is the one that brings you home. As I watch Emma working in our garden, humming "You Are My Sunshine" while she plants flowers, I'm reminded every day that miracles are real, hope is never wasted, and love, true, unconditional, parent-child love, can survive anything. Sometimes the person you're looking for is also looking for you. Sometimes they're closer than you think. And sometimes when you're brave enough to put your heart on the line and swipe right on hope, the universe rewards you with the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to love your family again. My daughter is home. After 34 years of searching, of hoping, of refusing to give up, Emma is finally home. And our story is proof that no matter how dark things get, no matter how many years pass, it's never too late for a happy ending.